And this is why it pays to not get rid of your originals here, because we're going to redo these masks. The problem is that we have sharp edges here, and that's giving us sharp edges in substance. And, you know, we can work it to a certain degree in substance, but, you know, as we soften up the edges, we're also messing with the colors that we have in here, because the colors started to bleed on the inside here. And I still want it to have a sharp edge, but I want the whole design softened. So we're going to redo our masks slightly. And we'll start with this pattern mask, because that's how we did it the first time. So I'm going to just magic wand the white areas. And then I'm going to come into select and mask. And here I have a bunch of sliders that I can use to adjust this image. And what I want to do is I want to get rid of like these really sharp bits. So I'm going to start smoothing it. And by doing that, I'm rounding the image out. Now, I like the shape of this, but it's a little fuzzy for me, so I'm going to up the contrast a bit, and that's going to give me a crisper edge. So I'm going to click OK, and we're going to make a new layer, and just like we did it the first time round, I'm going to fill this. Let's take a look and see what that looks like. I'll make a new layer. We'll fill it with black. Yeah, that's much better. I think that's going to work better for us because it's going to, I don't know, this looks more like fabric. So we've got our original, and I'm going to hit Control and click on the layer, and that's going to pick out everything that's there. And we're going to make another layer, and this time we are going to stroke. And this was our original, and we did it on the inside. And again, that's a much smoother line that we have. I'm holding down Alt, and I'm just dragging myself a copy. I'm not going to merge these quite yet until we're sure what we're doing, because I want to take a look at it in Substance in a minute. But we're going to be replacing this pattern mask, and we're going to be replacing this thread mask. But before we do that, we're going to need to make a new normal mask. So I'm going to delete this layer mask, and again I'm going to hit Control to pick up the the rough weave areas. I'm going to highlight this layer here, and I'm going to click on my layer mask, and this is going to give me a new mask. And now this is matching up with our new stuff up here. So I'm going to save this as my normal mask. And now we can go back into Substance and see how this works now. I see what we did. We forgot to get rid of that business up in here. So we're going to have to go back and fix it. Yeah, so here's the problem. We forgot to take care of this. And I believe the last time we used 100.6 to do our transform. And then I'm going to crop the image. And we're going to do the same thing here. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, we're having some problems here. And the reason this is coming up and it didn't come up the last time was because by doing that smooth, we actually changed the shape of the corner. It didn't happen on a straight line. There's no really good way to fix. I mean, it's going to be a hack is what it's going to be. What I'm going to do, and it's not perfect, but I'm pretty sure it'll be okay. I'm going to replace those things because there's really no easy way of kind of doing it globally here. So I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to paste it out. And then I'm going to kind of come in here and replace the bad ones. Now, they're bigger because what happened here was that we took, this is that sort of pixel width that we removed when we did our 100.6, because that's 0.4 on each end. So that's almost a full pixel. Well, it's more than that, but it's, you know, it's like a full width of whatever it's measuring. Now, we can leave it as is. I think I'm going to try to make it a little bit smaller, so I'm going to hit Shift and reduce the size down. This is never going to be perfect. I'm just trying to get it to fit into this spot so I have a little bit more gray. You know, but once you start seeing the overall pattern, it's really not going to be noticeable. Okay, so I've got this one, and I'm just hitting Alt to copy it out, and I'm lining them up because this is our seam, so they really should, well, at least along their middles, they have to be absolutely lined up. And because I'm entirely unsure of what I'm doing, I'm not going to delete them. I'm just going to make a layer mask. Yeah, I think that's probably okay. Let's do the other side. So I'm going to pick one of these horizontal guys now. I'm going to copy it and paste it. I forgot what I reduced that other one down to, but we'll wing it. I'm hitting Alt and just doing it from the center. Wait a minute, that's not right. I wasn't hitting Shift correctly, because if you want to keep it in the aspect ratio, you have to also do Shift. So that fits. Now I'm hitting Alt again, and I'm moving it to make a copy. And we're going to do the same thing, making sure that they're lining up along their middles. And I'm going to fill this with black. So as I was doing this, I realized that we really should have done it the other way around. We should have done it on the other mask, because now our lines, you know what, we're going to reverse engineer if we have to. I'm not redoing this. I'm going to pick up all the layers, and we're going to right click and merge all those layers together. Yeah, we're going to redo this mask. So I'm just going to get rid of this one. Okay, all we really need to do is get this outer outline. I'm going to get my magic wand, and now up until now we've been doing non-contiguous. I'm going to hit this contiguous button, which means that it's not going to jump any solid lines. And as luck would have it, we have all solid lines here, so if I do that, it's going to pick up the outsides only. And then I just hit Shift Control I, and that will invert my selection. And the way we had this set up anyway was, you know, these lines are supposed to be on the inside. So all we have to do now is just make another layer and fill this with white. It is, I was like, that's not quite white. Yeah, that's this off-white here. I'm going to fix that by going into Hue, Saturation, Lightness, and just turning it into a white. Now we don't see any difference between the two. But these two now completely match up. And if we offset it again, it's fine. And if we offset this again, it's fine too. So let's save these guys out again. And I'm hitting Control and clicking on the layer because we are going to be deleting this layer mask and applying a new one. And then saving this out as our normal mask. And now when we come back into Substance, that problem is fixed. And honestly, you can't tell where we switched them out. It's a good hack. It works. Now let's come back in here and see whether we can't get this to work a little bit better. Now that we've softened our edges up. So that color is fixed now. I didn't like the way that color was kind of bleeding in. And our normals for this, actually I'm worried less about that than the height. Let's take a look at this height. I want to take a look and see what happens if instead of this blur, we switch it out with a bevel. It might work better for us. Because what it's also going to do is give us a normal, and I think that'll help with the problems that we're having here. Yeah, it's already looking better. And let's decide where we're going to put this normal. So we have, that's our basic pattern. That's the fuzziness. I think I want to put it in here after the actual fabric and blend it with what we've already got. I already know that that is going to have to come way, way, way down. Yeah, that's gotten rid of the, that sharpness that was happening with the edges there. So I think that's okay. So we're now ready to deal with the scattering. And I kind of wanted to save it for last because, we're going to kind of jump back and forth between here and Unreal because we can't really render it in. Sometimes as a cheat, I'll switch it out temporarily for an emissive, but it doesn't really do the thing. It doesn't really do the trick because it does it evenly, whereas the subsurface scattering is directly related to where your light source is. So it's going to have more going on closer to the light source, and then it's going to fade out as it gets further away. So really the best place to look at it is in the engine, wherever you're going to be using it. Yeah, I just thought of one more thing that we could do that will probably even make this even better without adding anything, is to change this other bevel, this one. Because now that we have two bevels, we can have this go down in height and then come back up again by making this bevel smaller. Because remember, that line is running along this inside, so right now it's flat. But if we change this distance, oops, and that also makes this shinier. Let's see what's going on here. Yeah, I think that's better. It makes it look like it's more of a separate thing. Okay, now I'm happy. Scattering. When we're doing the scattering, we're thinking about, right, when light is passing through this particular fabric, where is it going to pass through more and where is it going to be blocked more? And so these spaces in between the weave are going to let through more light, and the other places aren't. So according to our grayscale maps, that's our white areas are going to have the least amount of surface scattering. So if we're going according to our map, or I think probably this one, we're going to have to invert it. And then we're going to get two levels nodes, and we'll split it up according to the pattern. This is all very familiar. Right, so this top one is going to be the rough area, and I want even less in here. I want it to be almost completely impermeable to light. So maybe a little bit shining through, but really not much at all. And the finer material, we can actually lighten up a bit. And I want to add a couple more things in here, namely, well, one more thing. We want to add another blend node for our thread, which I don't want any light at all to come through. So I'm going to keep this as a black, pure black, and I'm going to apply our mask to it. There's our mask. I think it's this one. Yeah. So that gives us a completely black edge here. And then we have a very little bit in the thick fabric, but much more coming through the finer fabric. So I'm going to put a box around this. Okay, so that's our subsurface mask done. And the rest is pretty simple. All we need to do is take whatever color we have, because whatever is happening in the color of what's going on in that particular area. So we'll get a blend, and we'll use this as a mask for this. And we can, it'll read the checkers as black, but if you want to see what it looks like, we can also do this. And so you can see there's a very little bit of color coming through, and it already kind of looks like, like a fabric. And we'll apply that. All right, so we're ready to, I'm going to do clean. I don't know what extras I have, just that one. Okay. We're now ready to export this out to Unreal and see what it looks like. I'm saving it to this folder. I'm just saving myself some work later on copying these files. Okay, so we'll meet up in Unreal. All right, so let's go ahead and import our fabric, and we'll let it create a material. And we have our engine, and we have the instance here. On my second screen we have the instance, which I'll bring in here. And before we actually fix the material, we need to make sure that we've got our height and our subsurface and our specular level checked off. I'm also going to change the output size to 2K, and we'll save that. And here's our material. And it's already imported a lot of the information in for us, but those unchecked maps didn't get put in here, so we're going to have to add those in. And I'm just going to duplicate this. We had 3 of them. So what are we missing here? I know we're missing we're missing our scatter, that I know. So we're missing our height. And I believe we're also missing our specular level. We'll fix those. Well, why don't we just assign them now? So this is specular level, and we're just going to change the material so that it matches up. And then we want fabric to height, and then we want fabric to scatter. There we go. Now, if we take a closer look at our material here, you'll see that we don't have anything for our scattering. And that's because we have to change the way that this material is rendered out. This stuff will keep the same. Instead of having the default lit, we're going to set it as two-sided foliage. And that all of a sudden gives us a subsurface color. And I'm also going to make it two-sided, because chances are if you're doing a fabric, you really do want it two-sided. And this means that it's not going to cull the back face. And now we have some place to, put all this stuff into. So the specular we'll put in here. The height we'll put in. That's the other thing we haven't changed. We have to give it tessellation. And I'm going to use PN triangles. And now I'll have some place to plug my height into. And I'm going to get a constant. And I'm just going to set the tessellation multiplier. That just tells you how fine it makes the tessellation. And our subsurface scatter we'll put in here. Yeah, so we're getting some scattering in there. It's a relatively thick material, and that's what we're going to deal with next, because it'll be nice if we can, what I need is a material where I've got like this really fine stuff, and it looks like it's got like these thicker bits on top, which is, the thread. And I think the other thing I want to do with the thread to make it look like it's even more kind of appliqué on top is when we get back into substance, I want to, I think, add some extra ambient occlusion in here to really set those off. So we'll mess around with that a little bit. And I also want to put in input parameters so we can adjust the thickness of the material. So, we can set that subsurface scattering higher or lower. So once we do that, that's just determining how much light is passing through that fabric, which kind of gives the effect of a thinner or a thicker fabric. But I think this is an okay start. We're starting to see stuff happening in here. So we'll go back to substance and do those things we just talked about. Okay, so take care of the ambient occlusion. The simplest way of doing it is just actually making an ambient occlusion off of this mask specifically. And we'll adjust that so it makes more sense. First of all, we'll bring the height depth down. Well, let's leave the radius alone for now. Let's see what happens. So we're going to replace this. We're using it as a mask right now. We're just going to get rid of this section altogether. Well, we're not going to get rid of the blend mode. We're going to get rid of the mask. And then we're going to replace that. And we'll turn it into a multiply. Yeah, those look more like appliques now. Well, not really, like woven in, but I don't know. It's kind of this weird ancient fabric I'm supposed to do. We'll get rid of this. I'm going to put another levels node in here. First, let's mess around with the radius in here because we've almost got it, I think. I want that edge pretty sharp. And this is where I like to use a levels node. I just feel I get more control over it sometimes. Okay, happier with that. And next we want to take care of that scattering issue. So I'm double clicking on my graph. And I'm going into my input parameters, and we're going to make two of them. We're going to make a fabric thickness. I'll make the default 0.5. And while we're in here, I'm also going to make a tile, because it'll be nice to be able to just automatically tile this fabric. And this will make an integer 1, and we'll call it tile. And the minimum I'm going to set to 1 because I really can't have a 0 tile. I'm going to move the maximum up to 20, but you can set that as whatever you want your maximum to be. Right, so let's come back in here and apply our fabric thickness. As I move this towards 1, this fabric is becoming thinner and thinner and thinner because it's getting lighter, which means that there's more light passing through it. That means that I want to put my input parameter on my level out high right here. So I'm going to create an empty function. Now, you'll notice for starters, the slider is actually running in the opposite direction. So as we're moving it up to 1, this is getting lighter, which from a user's perspective is kind of backwards. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to invert my, my actual input parameter slider. I'm going to get a 1 constant, and I'm going to get a subtraction, and then I'm going to get my variable. And since my fabric thickness is a number that is running from 0 to 1, if I subtract it from the number 1, that is going to be the inverse. Now, you can go ahead and add more in here where you're limiting it, but you don't know. You may want to use this fabric like actually glued to something, in which case you really do want 0 as your, as the amount of light that comes through. So I'm going to leave it alone, and we're just going to do the same thing. Actually, you know what? I'm going to come up here. I'm going to copy this, and we're going to apply it. This one, I think. When did I put it on? No, I put it on that one. We're going to apply it on this one. I know I applied it because this will turn red. And I'm going to paste that in here, and I'm going to set this as my output node. And I've got the default set to 0.5. So what it's going to do is whatever we set in here as far as the levels that we liked with the contrast of the actual stuff that's happening, it's just going to make that whole thing darker or lighter according to each individual node here. And then before we get back to Unreal and hopefully the end of our material here, we're going to allow it to tile. And the simplest way to do that is to create a transform node that's going to do that for us. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of using this transform matrix. I have a couple of videos up on the channel that are already dealing with it. I'm just going to go ahead and make this according to what we learned in those videos. So we're going to create an empty function, and we're going to get in there. Now, our matrix is a float 4, and that's the result that's expected. So we're going to get a float 4. This is going to be our end result. I am actually going to go back in here and talk about it just a little bit. I'm going to get rid of this. If we come back and look in here in the actual matrix itself, this is 2 float 2s that give us a float 4 result. For right now, as far as tiling is concerned, we only care about the x1 and the y2 values. Those are going to determine how many images fit into this space. As this number goes up, we're going to fit more and more images in here. So if I change x1 and y2 to the number 2, that'll be like tile 2. The only thing we really have to do then is just make sure that whatever, our integer is going to go in here. We just have to make sure that we write a formula where this same integer is getting put in both spots. Let's go back and actually do that now. So the thing to remember, the pattern is 1, 0, 0, 1. So we're going to need a constant 0 because we have those zeros, and we're going to have to just plug that in for those. We're also going to need our integer for our fabric size, fabric tile rather. Now all of this stuff is dealing with floats, and this is an integer. So before we do anything else, we're going to have to cast this to a float. So we've got them compatible, but our end result needs to be this float 4. And in order to do that, we're going to need a couple of float 2s. So we're going to kind of funnel this number into this float 4. So our pattern is 1, 0, 0, 1. So 0, 0. And then that 1 we're going to replace with whatever that fabric tile integer is. So we'll plug that into these guys. And then we turn these two float 2s into a float 4 and set that as the output node. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That means we need 7 more of these. And we'll just start lining them up. Actually, I'm not going to do that. That's weird. It's going to give us problems. Let's hook up the other end first. And let's give it a test drive. So we can't really test the fabric thickness here. I mean, we can watch it happen in here. If we get... So yeah, you see, so it's getting, this is like at its thinnest, and then it gets more and more opaque. It's never going fully down to 0, but if you really wanted to do that, you can adjust it down. And then our tiles, so we can get it to be like really fine. So we'll go back into our Explorer, and we'll republish this out, and take a look at what's going on in Unreal. And we'll find our Fabric 2. I'm going to right click and re-import. And we can open up our material again. Actually, I don't want to open up, my bad. I want to open up the instance. And our input parameters are now appearing in here. So we can tile. And we can also change that fabric thickness. Doing any changes? There we go. Let's see. I'm not sure if I'm seeing any, but I'm not sure if it's because there's something wrong with the input, or if it's because I just, you know, like the fabric's really thick, which it is. Get that squared away. I'm going to come back in and look in Substance, but I mean we're almost there. I think what I want to see happen is that when it gets really light, I think I want that to look almost gauzy, which will require changing the map. So let's shoot back to Substance and we'll try to fix it there. Okay, let's take a look at what's going on here. I'm going to go into my specific masks here. I'm going to leave this alone because that's not really the issue. The issue is this stuff that's up here. Because now I'm just setting up the relationship between the black and the white in here. So this is, I'm dealing now only with these thick areas. I don't really care what's happening to the thinner areas. So again, this one's always going to be thicker. And I think I want it more even though. That's because I don't want there to be a lot of difference between the lighter areas of this section and the darker areas. I think that's probably okay. This one, I want a lot more contrast. So this is at 50%. And let's take a look what happens when we fool around with these guys. This is kind of the problem. That I can't really see it in the renderer, which is kind of a drag, but I think I definitely like the lighter bits. When it goes to its darkest though, I want to see less in here. Oh. I'm going to take care of it in here. So that's why it switched out on me, because it'll revert back unless I tell it to apply. So this area, that's my problem here. There, that should do the trick. Because I don't want it to go, I never want it to be quite as black as that, but I think I might go a little bit blacker. Yeah, like that. So let's come back to our input parameters. So that's at its thickest. think that'll work. Let's try it again. So we'll re-import again. Yeah, that's doing what I needed to do. Now it's like you can really see when the thickness is really low, you can really see the little sort of the weave in there. Okay, so I think this is done. I'm sorry it was kind of a long and convoluted demo this time around. It's just that I really didn't have time to do a separate thing because I really need to get this thing done. I've been putting it off. So yeah, I'll try to be a little bit more organized and actually work out the material rather than forcing you to work it out with me. But hopefully this has been helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.